Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving headfirst into a highly debated set of sociological and theological arguments from Christian theologian R. Albert Mohler Jr. and author Rachel Wilson. We're going to break down their specific critique of modern womanhood, feminism, and what they call the created order. Just to be clear, we're looking strictly at how they frame this issue, analyzing the data they point to, and trying to understand the philosophical conclusions they draw from it all. It's a deep, structured look at their perspective on how society functions best, so let's jump right in.
To help make sense of these complex arguments, here's our roadmap. First, we'll look at the female happiness paradox. 2. Rewriting the cultural rules. 3. Mohler's created order. 4. The paradox of freedom. And 5. Returning to the design.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the female happiness paradox, and the data behind it.
The source material actually starts by posing a massive central question. Why are women reportedly less happy today, even with unprecedented freedom and education? Think about it. By modern standards, the average American woman today is the most educated, most financially independent, and legally free woman in all of human history. Yet, according to major studies that started coming out in the early 2000s, there's this mystery. As feminist ideals really became the cultural default, women's self-reported well-being steadily fell. The authors use this paradox, this idea that having it all has somehow left many feeling like they have nothing that truly satisfies, to frame their entire investigation.
When you compare the metrics, it's a pretty sharp contrast. On the one hand, you have the absolute triumphs of the modern era, right? Surges in university degrees, labor force participation, legal autonomy. But on the flip side, the authors point to metrics of decline that have tagged along with these victories. They highlight data suggesting women today are lonelier, more depressed, and much less likely to have children than previous generations. It's this exact contrast that Mohler and Wilson argue demands a much deeper explanation than just, modern stress.
To put this paradox into perspective, the source material highlights a genuinely staggering statistic. Today, roughly 25%, so 1 in 4, American women are on at least one psychiatric medication. Alongside that, the authors note that rates of alcoholism among women are higher than ever recorded, while marriage is increasingly delayed or just discarded altogether. Now, for Mohler and Wilson, these aren't just isolated mental health stats. They view them as a flashing red warning light on the dashboard of modern civilization, basically signaling that something foundational is completely broken.
Moving on to Section 2, rewriting the cultural rules, focusing on the 1970s shift.
Have you ever stopped to think about your own cultural defaults? Author Rachel Wilson articulates their diagnosis with a really compelling thought. She says, almost everybody today kind of looks around and we all know that something's off. We're swimming in feminist waters just like a fish doesn't know it's in water. Wilson actually spent years investigating early feminist writings, going way back to thinkers like Mary Wollstonecraft. In her conclusion, the movement didn't just ask for fair treatment, it completely reimagined what women are fundamentally for. And because this ethos became so dominant in the 1970s, she argues that modern society doesn't even realize it's operating on a completely rewritten script.
Wilson actually noticed a stark generational shift right in her own family. Consider the new script, the one absorbed by her mother's generation. It prioritizes self-actualization, personal entitlement, and puts career first, kind of treating family as an optional accessory. Now contrast that with the traditional script that was quietly embodied by her grandmother, which focused on marriage, children, household work, and overall stability. Pop culture, from hit songs to shows like Sex and the City, heavily championed the modern script, but Wilson argues that her grandmother's life of sacrifice and stability was actually an exercise of a vocation aligned with reality, whereas the modern script really just celebrates self over sacrifice.
Which brings us to Section 3, Mohler's created order and its theological foundation.
Okay, to really grasp where these authors are coming from, we need to understand a very specific concept. Theologian R. Albert Mohler Jr. introduces what he calls the creation order. He argues that marriage, the distinct categories of male and female, and the family structure aren't just convenient social inventions or cultural constructs that we can tweak whenever we feel like it. Instead, he posits that they are intentional designs woven into the world by a creator. According to this view, when a culture actually honors this specific order, it tends towards stability and flourishing. But when it denies it, chaos and pain are going to follow.
And all of this boils down to one crucial point from Mohler. He says, you cannot sever freedom from form. He's basically arguing that created realities set necessary boundaries. In his theology, true freedom isn't having the absolute power to reinvent human nature. True freedom is living according to the design. When society rejects those boundaries in the name of liberation, Mohler argues, we don't actually escape them. We just end up crashing into them at high speed.
Let's look at how this plays out in Section 4, the paradox of freedom, specifically in modern relationships.
You might actually recognize this friction if you look at the modern dating scene. The source points out a major friction point. Women now dominate higher education and are increasingly out-earning their male peers. But on the other hand, sociological data suggests many women still deeply desire men who are more successful than they are. Wilson observes that women feel completely torn between this modern career woman script they were taught and a lingering inherent desire for a traditional marriage and a man they can respect and follow. The result? We've created a society with way more choices, but much less clarity. We have more individual autonomy, for sure, but far less communal attachment and joy.
And according to the authors, ignoring this proposed design has a domino effect with some pretty severe downstream consequences for civilization as a whole. Step 1. Declining birth rates mean an aging population with fewer future workers and caregivers. Step 2. Treating marriage as just a lifestyle choice or a contract leads to fragmented families, where children end up growing up repeating the instability they inherited. Step 3. Mohler insists you just can't suspend gravity forever. Because marriage is the basic unit of human society, treating sex as recreation and children as burdens ultimately causes society to crash under its own weight.
Finally, let's look at Section 5, returning to the design, which the authors see as the path forward.
So, what's their solution? Mohler and Wilson argue that the good life is a revealed pattern, and they propose returning to specific roles outlined in their view of the created order. For women, this proposed purpose centers heavily on marriage, motherhood, and the building of homes and communities. For men, it calls for responsibility, provision, leadership, and sacrificial love. Now, it's important to note the authors are very careful to stress that this pattern isn't meant to erase a woman's intelligence, ambition, or capability. Rather, they argue it actually orders those incredible capabilities toward purposes that truly fit human design and lead to genuine flourishing.
The whole goal of this framework is beautifully summed up by Rachel Wilson. Thinking of her own daughters, she writes about longing for a world where men and women are not adversaries, but allies. The source material argues that our modern cultural scripts have basically pitted the sexes against each other in this fierce competition within the market and the state. By returning to a covenant view of marriage rooted in creation, they believe men and women can stop competing and start collaborating as allies.
Synthesizing all of this, Mohler and Wilson throw out a fundamental challenge to the modern narrative. They ask us to reflect on this. What if the problem isn't that we tried God's design and found it wanting, but that we abandoned it and never really tried? They're asserting that the old order of traditional roles didn't fail society. Rather, the new order of total autonomy was built on sand. And the declining happiness metrics we saw at the beginning of this explainer? To them, that's the proof of a crumbling foundation.
So I want to leave you with a final provocative question drawn straight from the core of the source material. If ignoring the Creator's order is indeed what led to the paradox of modern unhappiness and isolation, is simply returning to that ancient design the most radical, countercultural choice a person can make today? It's a fascinating perspective, isn't it? It really forces us to look closely at our cultural defaults and ask hard questions about what truly brings human happiness. Thank you so much for diving into this complex topic with me. Keep asking questions and keep exploring.